I want to talk about Chelsea because the general consensus here is that Graham Potter was given an impossible task, given all the players that were brought in over the two transfer windows and the size of the squad that he's got to deal with. So everyone's been quite empathetic towards him. I'm wondering if the fans that you speak to within the Chelsea base have that same sort of outlook.
No, not really. Look, I mean, the ownership has changed, but the fan base hasn't. And they are used to success. And of course, there is an understanding of just the sheer scale of turnover at that club in the last 10, 12 months. Right, of course, from the ownership all the way down to the playing staff and backroom staff and all of the changes that have been made. And the fact that I think there are 31 first-team players on the books at the moment, just organising a training session is very difficult for Graham Potter. But, you know, they've won one game in the calendar year. I think it's 2 wins in 15. You know, yes, he needs to work out what his best team is. Yes, there are a lot of mitigating factors. Yes, there's been a lot of change. But Chelsea are still a good enough team to win football matches at home against lesser opposition. And they haven't been doing even that, let alone winning the bigger games, let alone getting through to the latter stages of the Champions League. Of course, they've got to overturn that deficit against Borussia Dortmund next week. He has to start winning games. I think there's, you know, I'm certainly sympathetic to him as well. I think there are sections of the fan base who are. And I think that if you talk to Todd Burley and Burley, I think they would say, we want this guy to be our successful manager long term. We want to give him the summer. We want to give him a chance to clear out some of these players. Let us streamline the squad. Add one or two more on top of what they've already done and really let him have a pre-season to work with these players because, of course, he came in September. He had no time to work with them. There was then a World Cup. You know, there've been games sort of thick and fast ever since, really. So he's not had time to impose his own methods on the team. But ultimately, it's a results business. Everybody in the studio knows that. You have to win matches to get from where they are now to the summer without there being a real groundswell of negativity towards Potter. And I do think that the next two games against Leeds and Dortmund are going to serve as something of a referendum at Stamford Bridge on Graham Potter. I think if they were to not to beat Leeds and then to go out of Europe to Dortmund, it could get quite nasty there. And then that asks a very, very difficult question of the faith of the ownership.
It's really not difficult, and we've been saying it for a while. He has to buy himself enough time, and that's what James is alluding to, and that is getting enough results to get you to the summer, to convince not only the fans, but probably the ownership, who are saying the right things at the moment, but will have their doubts, that you are the guy to take them into next season. And that's going to boil down to results. Look, the fans in the last, 20 years have basically had an ownership who, when it's not been going well, have just hired and fired.
Yep.
And that has brought them success. Whether people think that's a great model or not, that's not up to them. That was what the ownership wanted to do. Clearly, the new incumbents want to go down a different route. They want to show they're a more patient side. But as we all know, ultimately, when the fans turn, there's only one guy's head that's going to roll, and it's the manager. So, listen, he's got a big 3 or 4 games coming up. If he has, against relegation teams, threatened teams as well. If he has a bad result against Dortmund and 3 poor results against the likes of Leeds, I think might be Southampton, I can't remember who it is, he could go. And so he has to buy himself a little bit of time.
Who do the fans want in, James?
Well, they've been singing for Thomas Tuchel. I mean, that is not going to happen. There is no chance. Given the
juxtaposition that is of life.
Yeah, it was quite an acrimonious exit. So no, I don't. I mean, look, but that's always when you ask fans. Generally, they just want something new, don't they? If they get irritated by a manager or they get frustrated. I think one of the other things to say, of course, is that, as Craig says, they're used to a hire and fire culture. But also they're used to seeing player power at that club really dictate, that dressing room. You think about the John Terry sort of Frank Lampard era where, players would almost circumnavigate the manager and go straight to the board or even to the owner in some cases and just say, look, we don't think this guy's up to it. I don't think that would happen here, but I do think a consequence of the Todd Boehly decision to start handing out 6, 7, 8-year contracts to players makes it even harder for them to say, well, actually, we're going to blame the players here. It puts more pressure on the manager because they just can't, if they were to decide, actually, do you know what? these players we've signed are not good enough. We need another high turnover because Graham Potter's our man. Imagine the state of trying to get rid of some of these players on 6, 7, 8 year contracts. It's going to be hard enough shifting some of the deadwood they've got in the squad at the moment because everybody knows they've got 31 first team players and they need to sell. So it's going to be a fire sale there this summer. But that dynamic, I think, is also an added pressure for Potter that, everybody knows that these new signings are on such long contracts that the manager has to make it work with those players. And if he doesn't, then he's going to be shown the exit door even quicker.
But what have we seen at Man U? We saw a new manager come in and take control of a club. If there was player power, look at the Avram Grant stuff, the stuff like that. But at the time when Chelsea was the most successful, you knew Jose Mourinho was in charge of that club. When you look at most successful clubs, there's a leadership from the managerial role that you know who is in charge. And then everybody else in the locker room has to toe the line because you're going to lose that fight. And Chelsea needs to figure that out and find, if Graham Potter's the right guy, great, give him the backing to do it. If he's not, find the guy that can get control back at that club.
But in order to have that conversation, you need a win. You start with a win.
Well, yeah.
One single win, one single result.
A goal.
Yes, yes. Exactly. Let's start with a goal. Let's work to a win, and then we can have a conversation about control. But there is no chance that we can think of Graham Potter as a man in control when this team cannot score a goal or win a game. That's a first and foremost.
I think from the fan base, which ultimately we've seen a lot of managers eventually been relieved of their duties because of the pressure supporters put on. And we all know how owners and chief executives crumble at the first sign of a stand turning on them. Graham Potter, of course, results are the most important thing, but he's also fighting perception.
Yes.
The perception that it's Graham Potter,
he's too
he
nice a
managed in
guy.
Scandinavia and the lower divisions, did a great job, and then he was at Swansea, and then he was at Brighton, but really hasn't got what it takes to manage a football club of this magnitude. And so he's fighting all those things. And as James mentioned, he's got a squad that's imbalanced, it's overloaded. And to some extent, the football they played in Dortmund was pretty good. He can't control the fact of Kai Havertz and João Felix can't put the ball in from 10 yards.
Sure.
But ultimately, he's lumbered with that. And he has to deal with it. And if he doesn't deal with it, I'm afraid he's going to be gone.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.